So this is the remaining piece of the book by Scientific American called Becoming Human, and we already said emergence of the modern mind, and here we are saying emergence of intelligence. So we are trying to make a distinction between thinking, art, creation versus intelligence as a utilitarian tool. So I hope you understand the difference between mind and intelligence. So this is by Calvin, and it looks at chimpanzees having a remarkable aptitude for simple language and tool usage skills such as poking sticks into the termite mound to fish for snacks. So it's something that is inherited. Maybe baby chimpanzees watch and learn, but it's not clear that chimpanzees actively teach each other how to do that. Yet compared with those of humans, the abilities of these animals are fairly rudimentary. Human intelligence may have evolved through the enhancement of neural machinery that assists with the planning of quick hand and mouth movements, right? So we learn, vertical learning is typically what you inherit from genes, genetics, species going back to the birthplace for spawning hundreds of thousands of miles away, like salmon swimming upstream to lay eggs and die, even though they have never been there before in their life, and so on. So human beings inherit a lot of things. As we said, it isn't clear if all the brain patterns are inherited, and we often mention the example of mathematical parents giving rise to a mathematical child, or musical or sports abilities, etc. But we also do what is called oblique learning, so we learn from teachers, non-parents, non-family members, reading about people we have never met, like reading Steve Jobs' book to get inspired and do things, versus horizontal learning, where we are learning from peers, friends, community, and maybe religion and so on, but let me not go there. So are we just smarter on paper? If we look at cerebral cortex that is deeply convoluted, let me get the pointer, which is the deeply convoluted surface region of the brain that is most strongly linked to intelligence. A human's cerebral cortex, if flattened, would cover 4 pages of a typing paper. A chimpanzee would cover only 1, a monkey would cover a postcard, and rats would cover a postage stamp. So there is the body size versus brain size, and then there is the cerebral cortex area that we're talking about. So humans will cover 4 pages when the cortex is removed and cerebral cortex is removed and flattened. Chimpanzees have 1 page only, monkeys a postcard, and rats a postage stamp, relatively speaking. So invoking climate again, we have already seen this several times. So this is, let's say, just going back to depth of the ice cores in meters, so that's not time, you have to be careful, but time is up here, 250,000 years ago, and we just entered into the Pleistocene 2.8 million years ago. So you have to just get used to these various slices of time we keep looking at in terms of hominin evolution and so on. So here is the Holocene, over which the climate perturbations have been relatively mild. This is done here in terms of deviation of oxygen 18 content, so it's a measure of temperature which says warmer in this direction and colder down in this direction. We already mentioned elsewhere that the hominin Homo sapien brain is getting smaller over the last 10,000 years or so, and we don't know exactly why that is, and we talk about potential impact of technology or shared brain or common brain and so on and so forth. So rapid climate changes may have promoted behavioral flexibility in the ancestors of modern humans. During the last ice age, the average temperature was much lower than it is today, but it was also subject to large abrupt fluctuations that sometimes lasted for centuries. So we talked about Danskard-Ushker events, 1470-year period, and Heinrich events, which are much lower frequencies. During one climatic oscillation, for example, here in the red line, 13 degrees Fahrenheit increase within 15 years, and compared to the interglacial period we are here now, we are warming at the end we have warmed about 1.2 degrees since industrial revolution, which is a couple of hundred years. So this is much faster. Rainfall increased, so here temperature rose 13 degrees Fahrenheit, rainfall increased, so in Fahrenheit we have warmed by almost 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Increased by 50% rainfall globally, but this would also be important to look at the pattern, whether drier regions got drier and wetter regions got wetter, or more distributed rainfall happened, and so on. And the severity of dust storms fell, goes with the higher rainfall amounts, all in the space of a few decades. Cold periods began just as suddenly. Early humans may have needed considerable intellectual resources to survive these changes. This graph is based on work by Dansgaard of the University of Copenhagen and his colleagues using Greenland ice cores, so that the Dansgaard-Ushkur events. Kanzi, a 23-year-old bonobo, works with Sue Savage-Rambaugh at Georgia State University in 2004. By pointing at symbols that represent various words, Kanzi can construct requests much like those of a 2-year-old child. Okay, so that's a grown-up bonobo. Language experiments on bonobos help researchers determine how much of the syntax is uniquely human. Kanzi and Savage-Rambaugh are now at the Great Ape Trust of Iowa. This is information from 2013 when the Scientific American book was published. There are many such efforts, experiments with gorillas, chimpanzees, and so on. Here, looking at acquisition of language by children occurs quickly and naturally to exposure to adults. So this is often stated as the learning of language is happening from the intuitive part of the brain when they are children, whereas that being an intellectual part of the brain as an adult. So many adults would have trouble learning languages. And then there's a question of why some adults are very good at picking up languages and some are not. So speaking in single words here, age and months, that's the color here. This is speaking in two-word phrases. So you can see how the age goes much longer here in percentage of children. So some quickly learn, then there is a large range here, and then it flattens out at 36 months. Basically we are reaching 100% by then. Speaking in sentences of 5 or more words starts much later at about 30 months and then ramps up quickly. So this is the time when they begin to absorb. So they are picking up sounds, visual images, cues, words from parents, and there is even some research that says baby talk to babies does help them with various psychological and bonding things and so on and so forth. Apple or banana. So you have to think about the Darwinian model of thinking. The Darwinian model of thinking suggests that ideas compete for workspace within the brain. When a person is choosing between an apple and a banana, here spatiotemporal patterns of neural activity representing these possibilities, red for apples and yellow for banana, may appear in the cortex, so these hexagons. Copies of each pattern proliferate at different rates depending on the individual's experiences and sensory impressions. So we are acquiring constantly the data, and we are spreading this in the brain space, in the cortex. Eventually, the number of copies of one pattern passes a threshold and the person makes that choice, in this case to take the apple. So there is a trigger and then begins to spread, and then apple dominates, and then the person chooses the apple. And of course we also have the ability to do multiple things at the same time. So picking a drink while we are deciding on banana and apple, and also deciding whether to sit there and eat or take it and drive away with the car, or sit outside or inside, and so on and so forth. So the executive control can do multiple decisions as well. Throwing a ballistic movement at which humans excel despite the lack of effective feedback from the arm during most of the throw. So we chuck the ball. It's not like the arm is necessarily saying if you move this fast it'll go that far. It's just kind of empirical and done almost intuitively. Before the ball is thrown, the brain must plan the sequence of muscle contractions that will launch the ball toward the target. Some of the neural mechanisms that plan such movements may also facilitate other types of planning. So that's pointing to what makes us intelligent compared to, let's say, our primates or rats. This is also true again for multiple decisions. As I'm speaking, I may feel thirsty and reach for a drink, and my brain would have told me that I need to consume some water or whatever, and the hand would know whether I'm picking a plastic bottle that is squishy, so I have to use certain amount of force, versus a cup that is more solid, so I can hold it differently with different force and so on and so forth. So there are billions of instructions involved in doing these things, and this is what robotics is all about: how to make even simple tasks easier for the robot to perform, and how complicated it gets if the robot has to make multiple complicated decisions. Okay, so that's the emergence of intelligence. Again, not complete answers, but you get a sense that maybe climate was involved, maybe we were just lucky that our brain got wired differently, maybe a mutation allowed it, maybe the relaxing of the jaw muscles, eating cooked food allowed the cranium to grow bigger and the brain grew, and the gut got smaller, so more energy became available for the brain. So the idea of brain getting bigger is one thing, but getting more intelligent is a slightly different thing, and the mind and the evolved thinking is a separate thing. So all these things potentially may have climate connections, so I decided to include them here. Okay, so we'll move to the next chapter on the dispersal of Homo sapiens through Africa, but I may add other podcasts here if I find things that are interesting and related to evolution of behavior, especially if they seem like they're connected to climate. Okay.